Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. We certainly have a full round table of guests that you are going to, I think, enjoy as we go through this conversation. It is weekend edition, and that's an opportunity for us to look at some of the issues in the news, talk about what might be coming up in the future, and, of course, giving you a chance to join the conversation. 1-800-351-1212 is the number. Penna Dexter, Debbie Georgatos, and Kassie Dulin in the studio with us today. We have lots to cover. We have some religious liberty issues. We have another video that's come out from Planned Parenthood, as well as the Justice Department response to that. We have questions about immigration that have surfaced because of everybody from Ann Coulter to certainly maybe Donald Trump would be another part of that, I guess you say, and also how people are responding to him. And even this week we were supposed to have Ryan Anderson. He'll be with us on Monday as we talk about the marriage issue and how to respond. So, Penna, as always, we have more to cover than we'll possibly cover in 2 hours.
And Kerby, unlike other media outlets, we're not going to let Donald Trump suck all the oxygen out of the room, although we will talk about him.
You notice my pause as to whether I even want to say the name, because I know how that almost dominates the calls that come in as well. But let's start real quickly, as we oftentimes do, talking with somebody from Liberty Institute. Usually it's Kelly Shackelford, but sometimes it's someone else, and in this case it's Kassie. And you have some good news. Anybody that's been following the Mount Soledad cross case, and this has been going on for years in the San Diego area, I think you have some good news, don't you?
I do. So there has been a Veterans Memorial that has stood in the San Diego area since 1954. It has photos of over 3,000 veterans on it, honoring them for their service, and a large lighted cross in the middle of it. And for more than 20 years ago, the ACLU filed a lawsuit saying, oh my goodness, we can't have any religious symbolism. And so they filed a lawsuit against it. I guess they're allergic to crosses. So they filed their lawsuit, but that has been going through litigation for a while now. Liberty Institute has been defending them for free. But the really good news is that this weekend, the memorial was saved. The private actors in that involved, the Mount Soledad Veterans Memorial Association, was able to purchase the land and save the cross. So we are very grateful for this good outcome.
So, Penna, we followed this for some time. Matter of fact, it seems like that controversy started when Kassie was born. I mean, it was maybe not that long.
Probably well before.
Pretty close.
But nevertheless, we actually have a victory, and that's something to celebrate as we talk about these issues of religious liberty.
It is. And I mean, I guess if you could go one step better, it would have been that it could have actually been won in the courts, at the Supreme Court, because now the cross cases that across the country where they're still being challenged, like in Bladensburg, Maryland, for instance, one of Liberty's cases, they're still going to have to be fought. So in that sense, that's, it's too bad in a way, but it's wonderful that now the Mount Soledad Memorial Association owns the land. The cross is going to stay up, and it won't be torn down, which is what would have happened if this sale had not gone through. And it's already been to the Supreme Court one time. If it had gone back and we could have won a victory, great, but it'll have to be another cross.
Absolutely, but we have a lot of hope for that. And especially, I think it's just so crucial to note, these are veterans memorials, and they were erected to honor the men and women who have served so sacrificially, even as Penna was talking about with the Bladensburg Memorial. It was put up by the moms of soldiers who went away and lost their lives in service. And for that to be torn down just because it's a cross is really a tragedy. So we're very grateful that this one's going to be able to keep standing, and we are going to continue defending those that are under litigation so they can continue to stand.
Debbie, we've talked a lot about some of the legal precedents. We need some other legal precedents, but at least this was good news.
It was very good news. And I thought a few years ago, I mentioned right before I came on the air, there was some discussion about having this property purchased. And my recollection, and I haven't looked at it recently, was that the ACLU is essentially saying that won't solve anything. At that point, they were saying it's a tactic. You're just circumventing, you're just circling around the issue that is still going to be in public view. So I don't know if this represents the ACLU stepping back and saying, okay, as long as it's private land, we'll drop it. And the other thing that's just kind of related, we may get to talking a little later about the marriage cases, but I think the development of the marriage cases law in America and more people understanding how serious the concern is about the attack on Christianity, maybe it's just softening people on the left, because there's a lot of pushback now about people saying, yeah, there actually is an attack on Christianity. I mean, if ACLU has changed its position, which I think it has, and it's just saying, all right, we'll let it go if it's private property, maybe they're getting a signal. The American people are not up for this vanquishing of Christianity from American society.
Hopefully so. I completely agree with you. I think people are starting to realize there really is a danger to people of faith in the public arena. And that's what's amazing is that, this was public land and now it's even private land. And for them to try and say that they can strip religious imagery from a private land would be absolutely inexcusable.
And, the imagery's there because that's what meant the most to the families, those who lost people, the ones who served. So it's kind of like saying what meant the most to you can't, if it offends me, it has to go. I mean, it wasn't just a random selection of a cross. It was very important to the people who lost their lives and the family members who respected it in their honor.
Absolutely. And I think we all love in Normandy, the cross is there. And if this one can be torn down, what's going to happen to all those? And I don't think anyone wants to see that.
That cross, I think it's got these walls that surround it and then all the names. And it's, it was erected, but now it honors everyone who died in wars, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it includes presidents like Truman and Eisenhower, Admiral Stockdale and Halsey, Generals Pershing and Patton. It's just a wide variety of people who served our country and many who gave their lives. And that's something I think we all want to see honored.
Just before we take a break, let me come back to Debbie's comment about the pushback. And we posted yesterday the piece by David French, and I don't know if some of you've seen it. It says, and I thought we lost the war, because he said he woke up confused. And the point he's making is that ever since the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage, 3 separate polls show that support for same-sex marriage has declined.
Yep.
Not only that, but almost 6 in 10 Americans now support the right of religious business owners to decline to participate in same-sex to actually decline to participate in same-sex weddings, which is a sharp increase. And at the same time, Planned Parenthood, the world's largest abortion provider and social justice left's favorite organization, was reeling from revelations that its senior leaders appear to just love to talk about selling baby parts. After all, there are those Lamborghinis to buy. Well, that's just a little bit from David French, and the pushback has been rather dramatic in the last couple of weeks here.
Yeah, I guess when you see what the attack really accomplishes, some people will start to wake up finally. It's not like we haven't been talking about it for about 10 years and even 20 in some of these areas. And so, I guess better late than never. I just wish people would have realized earlier before we actually lost the definition of marriage in this country.
I know we talked about this earlier or in previous shows, but I am very hopeful that marriage definition will change again, that nothing the Supreme Court does is permanent. It's just subject to the next court. And I think there are even some legislative solutions the Congress is looking at about taking away jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in some areas. So I know that you wish people were awake to the challenge or the problem before it becomes extreme, but sometimes it's hard to do. They just, unless it's right in their face, they don't think really anything so crazy could ever happen here. Yes. But taking the cross down or changing definition of marriage or forcing churches and businesses to accept marriage as being between in the same-sex arrangement.
Sounds good to me. Senator Ted Cruz is the one that was talking about limiting appellate jurisdiction, and today he was in the well of the Senate accusing the majority leader of lying. So when we come back from the break, maybe we can talk about that issue too. That was a little bit of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington that most people didn't expect to see. And of course, Planned Parenthood's in the news, so we'll talk about that too. All that coming up right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
A new book on the state of the American mind reminds us of the ignorance and anti-intellectualism on college campuses and in our popular culture. One of the editors of this work is Emory professor Mark Bauerlein, who I've talked about before because he was the author of the book The Dumbest Generation, How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future. He was on my radio program recently to summarize what 16 different authors talked about in the book. Mark Bauerlein and Edie Hirsch in their chapters remind us that even in a time of unprecedented wealth and rising college enrollment, most students are functionally illiterate as well as culturally illiterate. Daniel Dreisbach wrote about the lack of biblical literacy in our society. He tells the story of the media reaction to President George W. Bush's address at the first presidential inauguration. Pledging a national commitment to serve the poor, Bush mentioned the biblical parable of the Good Samaritan. Media pundits wondered about this strange story. One CBS commentator confessed, "There were a few phrases in that speech I just didn't get." One of those, he said, was this allusion to a wounded traveler on the road to Jericho. You know, we might expect this level of biblical illiteracy when conducting a man-on-the-street interview, but we should expect better from well-educated political commentators. Dennis Prager recounts his experience when asking high school students if they would save their dog or a stranger if both were drowning. He sadly explains that aside from some religious schools, Jewish and Christian, he receives the same answer. 1/3 would save the dog, 1/3 would save the stranger, and 1/3 find the question too difficult to answer. When he asks why they would save the dog, the near universal answer is, well, I love my dog. I don't love the stranger. There is no moral examination, no contrast between humans and animals. These and many other stories and statistics remind us that we not only have cultural illiteracy, but we also have biblical illiteracy and moral illiteracy as well. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Debbie Georgatos, and Kassie Dulin. And we mentioned Senator Ted Cruz. He's in the news quite a bit. Maybe not as much as Donald Trump, but he certainly has been in the news quite a bit. And we mentioned a minute ago his idea of limiting the appellate jurisdiction for marriage, and that may be one solution. But he was in the Senate today speaking out against Mitch McConnell in ways that I don't think I've heard too many senators go after a majority leader. And maybe you can, Debbie, try to explain a little bit about what was going on.
Senator Ted Cruz, who is a Republican senator from Texas, had been part of the group in the Senate and the House who were trying to end something called the Export-Import Bank.
Right.
And that is historically, I'm not sure when it started, maybe Kerby knows
Under
all
Franklin
facts.
Delano Roosevelt.
Oh, okay, there you go.
It is the poster child for crony capitalism. The big companies like Boeing and others are the ones that benefit from this. And our tax dollars are on the line to give them kind of benefits. And it's something that, I don't care if you're liberal or conservative, you've got to say, why are we doing this? So anyway, go ahead.
Thank you for that. I was going to say the bottom line of the opposition was this is just a long-term crony capitalist thing that it's your taxpayer dollars that are helping some businesses and not others. And congressmen and senators elected are helped by this. They are part of the cronyism because they get support from the companies, it gets support from export-import. And so for decades, this bank has been perpetuated. It's a government-run thing. It's been perpetuated. And conservatives, really limited government conservatives, just say, why do you have any role in all of this in helping particular companies, not other companies? And so there was a big push this year. It was really led by the Heritage Foundation, but a big push in the Senate and the House to say just close it down, defund it, stop it. And it took Heritage and other conservatives a long time to persuade that this was indeed an important thing to do. It was worthwhile. It was, even if no one ever heard of it, it is symbolic of ending crony capitalism in Washington, which happens on both sides of the aisle. It wasn't an anti-Democrat or anti-Republican thing. It was just a good government goal. So finally, the Export-Import Bank was closed officially, and it declared to be closed. It was all over the news. This is it. It's done. And so, as it turns out, in a bill that is moving forward now, and it's not even, I can't remember what kind of bill it is.
It's a trade bill. Yeah, it's that one. Yeah. It was
that. Because the trade bill, I thought they agreed to take it out of that, but it's been put into another bill.
Right.
Because the bottom line was that the
it's
majority
back-end deal anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a kind of slipped in another bill that is coming out in the Senate. They are putting the Export-Import Bank back in place, and this was after Senator Mitch McConnell, who is the majority leader in the United States Senate, a Republican. According to Ted Cruz, in his statement on the open floor of the U.S. Senate today, said Senator Mitch McConnell lied to me. I asked him in front of the entire caucus, is the Export-Import Bank really done? Is it over? And he pounded his fist on the table and said, absolutely, it is done. And come to find out, the people who make money off of this and get support off of this sneak this export-import thing back into another bill. In fact, the discussion happened over the trade bill, and so that's what McConnell, I think, will say is, well, I didn't put it in the trade bill, it's in some other bill. That makes it okay. Yeah. But the big news of it is that this is a very open confrontation by an elected senator against a majority leader to say, you actually lied to us, and I'm telling the whole American public that.
Yeah, you don't see that very often. And again, lied to 54 Republican senators, and then having Ted Cruz, a little bit like Mr. Smith goes to Washington, stand there and accuse them of lying. And Mitch McConnell apparently in that said it 3 times. It's done, it's done, it's done. He said, and so I remember Ted Cruz saying it sounded like Peter denying 3 times. Which was a line that I thought was pretty good, too. But, Penna, I'm hoping that's not too much in the weeds, but it illustrates that you just cannot sometimes trust the leadership. And today, Ted Cruz was saying the same problem we used to have with Democrat Harry Reid, we're now having the same problem with Republican Mitch McConnell. So, your thoughts?
Well, I think I can take it right out of the weeds and make it very simple. This is the problem that we have with our elections. They promise things, and then they do not fulfill the promises. Republicans, and I've got a piece in front of me. It comes out of the Conservative Review. It's like just a one-page little commentary. All the candidates say they stand for secure borders, marriage, life, religious liberty, lower taxes, fewer regulations, repealing and replacing Obamacare, reduced spending, combating Islamic terror. But what do when they get in? They compromise. Yes, they make a big show of standing with the voters, the people that elected them, in one way, but then it's always slipped in another way, as Debbie just described with this piece of legislation today. And so that's why I appreciate a statesman like Ted Cruz, who sometimes he puts his own career on the line by standing up. But it's starting to look more and more now like the people that do stand up against the entrenched Republican establishment are actually getting some notice and some support and some traction out there. And since Ted Cruz is in the Senate, he has a great opportunity to make a difference right now. I mean, we now have a Republican Senate, and they're acting like Democrats.
Yeah. And he's even said that, we have in the House, we were told that if we can just have Republicans control the House, then things will get better. Well, that happened, and we didn't see any change. And then if we can just get Republicans to control the Senate, and now they control it, and we didn't see any kind of change. And you can understand why a lot of our listeners will call in from time to time saying, well, what difference does it make? I vote for this and I vote for that. Now, that's obliterating some very real differences.
It does make a difference.
It does make a difference, but I think the other issue is that when we talk about such things like defunding Obamacare, there's going to be a show vote coming up that means nothing. But when the various careers were on the line, Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, some of those individuals didn't get supported from the establishment. When Marco Rubio said on this Iranian deal that an amendment needs to be added that Iran has to recognize the right of Israel to exist, Mitch McConnell will not let that come up for a vote. Now, those are important issues to our listeners here.
Let me just add to this. The next election is so important, and I think the difference is going to be, are we going to nominate, is a Republican going to be nominated that will kind of take us from where we are and assume that all the things that Obama has done are done and we can't reverse them? Or are we going to nominate a candidate who will reverse some of the bad that's been done in the last 6.5, by then it will be 8 years? I think that's the decision that Republicans who vote in the primary are going to have to make.
I would think so.
I think that's brilliant, Penna, because I think we now have, I believe it's 16 declared candidates on the Republican side running for president. And I think people can just throw their hands up and say, well, who do I hear in the news more often, or whose name have I heard? But it's really important to look at not just what they say they will do, but their records, what they have done, have they taken hard stands or they haven't. And there are some who are just so moderate that they are much like the Democrats. They're kind of be in the middle governing, ruling elite class that currently runs Washington and happens to have a Democrat in the White House. Someone who will really, as Penna was saying a moment ago, take a strong stand on many serious things, like actually reversing Obamacare be one out of many, actually trying to repeal it. Got to go for the strong ones.
Well, and I think that that's something that has really appealed to people who are in my generation. They're looking for someone that they can trust and who is actually going to do what they say they're going to do. And they're saying not just what's popular, but what they truly believe. And I think that may be a reason, actually, that of all people, Donald Trump has been gaining some steam and momentum, because regardless of whether what he says is reasonable, you believe he's saying what he believes and he's willing to fight for it. And I think that's attractive to a lot of people, especially in my generation.
I think the Trump phenomenon, to my sense, what has driven him to be the leader in the GOP primary right now is that he is simply unafraid of the media. There are many Americans on the conservative side in the Republican Party who are tired of people who aren't brave, who don't speak up. They're tired of people bullied by the media, kind of mainstream or left-wing media, who at the moment the media says something, they cower and apologize. Oh, I didn't really mean to say that. Let me back up right now. They love he's unafraid. I think people are starving for boldness, bold leadership, clarity. It's like Reagan bold colors thing. And even if they think, well, maybe Donald Trump shouldn't have said that about John McCain, they like that about him not being a war hero, which was a bad thing to say, in my opinion. But they like the boldness and not afraid of being and not pushed around by the media. I just think people would respond to that. And I think this Ted Cruz thing he said today, there's going to be a lot of people go, wow, he said something I know is true, and I'm thrilled that he said it.
Yeah. Good points. Need to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to maybe get into this issue of Planned Parenthood. We have another video that has surfaced, and that's maybe another question to ask some of these candidates. How do you stand on this issue? Do you believe that you should defund Planned Parenthood, or at least have an investigation? And for those of you that were looking for an action item, that's the one that we have posted today. It's listed Defund Planned Parenthood. And in light of some of the new information that's come out from the Center for Medical Progress, this second undercover video, and I've heard there's others to come, by the way, that this one just, again, illustrates that maybe we don't need to be giving $528 million of our tax dollars to this so-called nonprofit organization. So if you'd like to express your opinion to your 2 United States senators and your representative, click on that button that says Take Action. And even if you don't know who your senators and your representative are, and you should, but even if you don't, just type in your address. The computer will find those for you, and then you can take the message we have or modify it. If you've not seen the videos, under our video section, we have all of the videos, and you can sit there and watch them yourselves. All available at the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Imagine you're in a room with 99 other people, 100 of you total. All of you listen to Point of View. You have that in common. What you don't have in common is that only one of you, actually less than one in the work of Point of View. That's what a recent study showed. 1 in 100, fewer than 1% have given, 99% have not. You listen. So I know you appreciate what this program provides. Now, I invite you to move from the big group to the little one. If 1/3, 33% of those listening, gives just $5 this week, we could fully fund Point of View for a year, 12 months. Not everyone will, not everyone can, but can you give $5 today, or maybe $55 or $105? Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send your gift to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Join the few, the thankful. Support Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to spend some time talking about Planned Parenthood, Penna Dexter, as well as Debbie Georgatos and Kassie Dulin. And Penna, I guess we have another video. We've mentioned it a little bit this week, but this is the first time I've had our panel together. And we've gone from the sale of body parts over lunch to an individual that said, you know, I really don't want to lowball the price here because, after all, I want a Lamborghini. this is just getting out of hand, and I suspect there are other videos to come, but kudos to the Center for Medical Progress because they've actually helped us to see the dark underbelly of Planned Parenthood.
They have. And when you look at the statements made, and this was another fairly high-ranking Planned Parenthood official, and in a sense, I noticed that she was trying to kind of have it both ways. She was trying to say, well, we don't really care about how much money we would get for these parts. And then she went to the other end of the spectrum with the Lamborghini comment. And, first we have to make sure that everyone understands that it's illegal to sell human body parts. It's patently illegal. So Planned Parenthood insists that's not what they're doing. They are actually accepting reimbursements for those parts. And they're saying that this is all kinds of things associated with the use of this for medical research, things like storage and transportation and other things that are associated, implantation of the organ, processing of the organ. That's what they're being reimbursed for. They insist they're not making a profit. But I read something else this week that was quite interesting associated with this, and that is that when you do abortions, there are certain restrictions and regulations about how you dispose of the fetuses. And so, in a sense, Planned Parenthood is, they don't have to pay those costs associated with the disposition of the fetuses, and instead, they will get an income if they sell the body parts. So there is a huge perverse incentive for them to do this.
Debbie, what are your comments? You've been looking at some of those videos and evaluating some of that and even talking about it on your own talk show.
I did talk about my show too, and I'm going to talk about it again this coming Sunday. The first video with the woman who's having lunch and she's taking bites of salad and sipping wine, you really I was thinking, if you saw that at a movie or someone made that into, you would just think that couldn't be, no one could be that cold. So it is a very upsetting thing to watch. I honestly haven't watched. I read about the second one. I haven't watched it. I probably should. I mean, in a very perverse way, it is helping people in America focus on what abortion is, because the left has worked very hard to talk about it in terms of a woman's choice, protecting reproductive justice, and all sorts of euphemistic terms that cause you to lose track of what's actually occurring. And the idea, I think one article we all looked at was talking about the idea that people were fine with abortion until they realized that you might sell body parts and all of a sudden you're upset about it. I mean, I think though the videos are helping people recognize that they really are actual babies. And the quick thing I shared last week, but I'll just share it again, was my friend who's telling me that they were getting calls from the media saying, wow, what's your comment? Would you guys comment on this video? And she had a reporter just say, essentially, I had no idea babies had parts like this. I mean, I didn't realize that aborted babies actually had livers and hearts and that were usable. And the fact the reporter ended up saying, I think I've changed my view on the pro-life issue. So I think there'll be more Americans like that.
Yeah, and I just think that's such a phenomenal point. And when you think about if it has to be a body part, it has to be big enough to serve some purpose. Think about what size we're talking about. Think about where in terms of development this baby is for its liver to be of value or its other body parts. And, I just had a niece a few weeks ago, and she's absolutely adorable and precious. And I actually saw her yesterday morning, and they wrap her up in a little swaddle cloth while she sleeps. And she doesn't love it, but it's so cute because when you take her out in the morning, the first thing she does is she stretches her arms straight up in the sky like, oh, I'm free. And but she's only a few weeks old, and she can do that. And I was just thinking, what if a few weeks ago someone had wanted to go inside her mom's womb and take her body parts? And when you think about the stage of development people are, it's interesting. We hear different polls about where America is on pro-life issues. If you look at where they are based on trimesters, Gallup did a poll in 2012, and support for legalized abortion for the first trimester is over 50%. But once you get to second trimester, it drops to 27%. Third trimester is 14%. There's 80% support for making abortion illegal in the third trimester, which is probably around when these babies' body parts are being harvested.
We've had state after state across the country trying to ban abortions after 20 weeks, 5 months gestation. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty big baby at that point. Mm-hmm. And now this development, I think, helps us to understand why Planned Parenthood challenges these in court, because they need these babies.
That's right.
Need these well-developed babies to get these parts. And so that's an interesting part of it. And just to think about the sensibilities of the nation, Charles Krauthammer had a great piece today. He is not purely pro-life, but on this, he had some really good statements. He said the problem is not only the obvious, what abortion does to the fetus, but also what it does to us. And I think that's kind of the message, or one of the messages from these videos of these high-ranking doctors in Planned Parenthood who are so cavalierly trading in human fetal tissue and body parts of tiny little babies in the womb. And he says that it compares to how assisted suicide has hardened the sensibilities of people who live in the Netherlands since it's been so commonly practiced there. We're a nation that's more pro-life, but we still have part of this country who is allowing this and has allowed this. We've got elected bodies in Washington, D.C. who fund Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
So we still got some work to do.
We certainly do. Let me come back to the point that both of you made, and that is these are higher-ranking doctors. In case you have not looked these up, it's Dr. Deborah Nucatola, who was the first one, a senior director of medical services at Planned Parenthood. I mean, about as high as you can get. The second one is Dr. Mary Gatter, and she actually is the president of Planned Parenthood's Medical Directors Council. So you couldn't go any higher up unless you got Cecile Richards talking about it. So the first problem, I guess, for Planned Parenthood is you can't say, well, these are people that are underlings. You couldn't do the Mission Impossible. We have no knowledge of what these individuals do. So the only response I've seen so far from Planned Parenthood is, well, we do apologize for the tone. Which is not a very good response, it seems to me. I understand, though, the Justice Department is going to be looking into this. What about that, Debbie?
Oh, yeah, they're going to crack right down on Planned Parenthood. Not really. Actually, the comment out of the Justice Department was concern for someone taping a conversation without the knowledge of the doctor who was making these comments. And we were talking in the break about different states have different laws about that, and I'm not sure what the law is where these recordings were made. But, in some states it's illegal, and so their concern is whether a law was violated, taping a conversation that a doctor didn't realize she was being recorded, rather than the fact that they're talking about selling baby parts and negotiating prices and wanting to make enough money off of that. This is just a level of callousness that, to the point we're all talking about, it's like that desensitized to violence thing when they studied kids. We're desensitized to the notion this is a baby. And even Hillary Clinton, I was just looking at my phone, she would often appoint a moment just in response to all this Planned Parenthood stuff to say, this is just an attack on the woman's right to choose. She just couldn't respond with a human heart and say, this is, I'm floored, I'm flabbergasted, I'm stunned, I'm whatever word she could have used. She went right to, you have to protect a woman's right to choose. She can't get off of the right to choose language to talk about, it's a baby.
That's amazing.
One thing that's been circulated this week has been the list of donors to Planned Parenthood, all these companies. And now it's kind of funny because the companies are coming back. Coca-Cola, Ford, and Xerox have all said, hey, listen, we don't give anything to Planned Parenthood. We don't match our employees' donations. Please take our names off your list. Planned Parenthood has had to go so far now as to take that whole list of corporate donors off their website.
Yeah. Well, it's always nice when you see some of the corporations heading for the tall grass, and, because they recognize, even if Planned Parenthood's best answer was, well, we didn't really maybe like the tone of Dr. Nucatola. That was the best that they could come up with. Not too good. And back to the point you made a minute ago, Penna, trafficking in fetal body parts is a federal crime. Seems to me the Justice Department should not spend so much time wondering whether or not the Center for Medical Progress taped these illegally and look at the bigger crime, and that is whether or not Planned Parenthood is involved in a felony for which some people could go to jail.
Yeah. And of course, now they're scrambling in D.C., and I'm so glad to see it, because we should not be complicit in this type of activity with our tax dollars. And we are, because we fund Planned Parenthood. So they've got to do something about that very quickly.
Go take a break, and if we have maybe gotten your interest so far, you're welcome to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Do you think it's time to defund Planned Parenthood? $528 million of their tax dollars go to them. Now, they assure us that not a penny of that goes to abortion services, but money is fungible. And, of course, some of the other questions you have to ask in terms of the harvesting of livers and hearts and brains and other things. And if you think that that's something that Congress should be investigating, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. And even if you don't want to come on the line and you want to at least express your opinion to your elected representatives, we've made it about as easy as possible today. Just simply go to the Take Action section, type in your name and address. It will surface your two senators, your representative. We give a suggested note. You can modify it as you wish, hit submit, and you've done your civic duty. We'll come back. We have lots more to talk about, but if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Polls show that American society is becoming more and more pro-life. And that's excellent news, due in no small measure to the heroic work of the pro-life movement over the years. Technology that allows us an increasingly clear and awe-inspiring window into the womb means no one can deny this is a human life. This probably explains why expectant parents increasingly refer to their unborn children by name well before the actual birth. Washington Post columnist and former George W. Bush speechwriter Michael Gerson notes how early young parents' protective instinct kicks in these days. Birth, he writes, is somewhat of an arbitrary dividing line. In a recent column, he explained that particularly as technology has allowed us to peer into the womb, human instincts for protection have engaged earlier than 9 months. But then there are those who have completely lost that instinct, like the Planned Parenthood doctor who over lunch nonchalantly discussed her organization's practice of trafficking in baby body parts. She was captured on video describing, between bites of salad and sips of red wine, ways in which she encourages abortionists to perform their craft so as to leave intact certain body parts for medical research. She assumed her lunch partners from the Center for Medical Progress were right there with her on the utilitarian good this trade in human tissue provides. They were not. In his column on this, Michael Gerson pointed out that our society is becoming more liberal and inclusive, a trend which has been created and fostered by the left. Yet despite the science that clearly highlights the humanity of the unborn, support abortion, even late-term abortion. On this issue, convenience and other concerns trump liberals' trademark compassion. Mr. Value to the fetus until it emerges from the birth canal. This position, he says, is medically and morally implausible. Despite the science, we're still a nation divided on the issue of abortion and the sanctity of human life. Ian Tuttle at National Review describes the schizophrenic state of the country, pointing out that there are those who believe the unborn are persons endowed with the right to life, and those who believe the unborn are property, disposable, and by extension, exchangeable within the confines of existing law. The fetus has moral worth that the state is duty-bound to protect unless the mother decides it doesn't, in which case the fetus can legally be aborted. And by the way, why not harvest some fetal tissue for research while we're at it? The division on abortion extends into the halls of Congress. Lawmakers battle over ending the flow of federal funds to Planned Parenthood. That should be a no-brainer now. And amazingly, a bill that would nullify all restrictions on abortion keeps rearing its ugly head. Pro-life Americans still have work to do. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter's commentary just aired right now on our network feed, and if you have not had a chance to hear it, you can read it. It's under the Viewpoint section entitled Divided on Life. Penna, there's a good illustration. Schizophrenia, where on the one hand we say these babies are not worth saving, we can abort them, and on the other hand we're saying they're really valuable because of their parts. In some hospitals you can see in neonatology they're trying to save a second trimester child, and down the hall they might be aborting a child of the same gestational age. We are really divided on life, aren't we?
We are, and it kind of has to do with the intention for that child, in the sense the mother's feelings or thoughts about it. And so, we've been celebrating a little bit because contrary to the other issues we face, Debbie mentioned this at the beginning of the show, where we're losing, we have been gaining pro-life advocacy. We are a pro-life nation. If you took polls, on balance, we are. But we still have this huge element. We still have the left who somehow, even though they're pretty compassionate about other people in the country and the poor and animals and the environment and all that, they're not about the baby. And so we are still schizophrenic on abortion. And, one thing about this issue, I think, is that the science helps us. This is an area where the science helps us because we had a 10-year debate over partial birth abortion. And because we could see into the womb and see that from the earliest days of gestation, that's a baby, we won that finally. And I think a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we're painting more pictures. We're painting the fetal pain picture now with all the debates over fetal pain bills. And now we're painting a picture of a baby being torn apart and aborted in a certain way so that his body parts can be used.
Very good. Let's take some phone calls, and in the second hour, we'll certainly focus on some other issues as well. Been a lot of question about how the other Republican candidates should respond to Donald Trump. Rick Perry has one kind of mindset. Ted Cruz has a different one. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about whether or not to change that Department of Defense directive, which prevents individuals who have demonstrated in their military service that they know how to handle a service weapon or a rifle, but nevertheless, when they come to the Washington Navy Yard or when they go to a recruitment center or even go on base like at Fort Hood, they have to turn in all the weapons. And right now, you have a situation where a few militia people are outside of recruitment areas with guns to defend, quote, the individual inside who have demonstrated that they know how to use a weapon. So that's another question that we talked about yesterday. But let's take some phone calls on this issue of Planned Parenthood, and we'll head out to Georgia first. Tom, what would you like to ask or comment on?
Well, it was just interesting. I was listening to y'all's conversation. In the Macon Telegraph in the last week was a column in the opinion page from a bioethicist, and was talking about the latest movement in bioethics. And he cited articles, and sadly I don't have that in front of me at the moment. But he talked about how there's this movement now to allow after-birth abortion.
Yes.
Which struck me as, well, the next logical outworking, because if it's okay to abort before or in the middle, then after, as long as it was inconvenient to the mother.
Wow. Well, Peter Singer, that's kind of been something he's advocated, even up to the age of 2 years old.
Yeah, how depressing is that?
There is that, I think it's the British Journal, because I've written about that. There's a commentary that I've written so you can read a little bit more about it. And that's where they really began to talk about the fact that when we have situations where, and again, I'm just using a pro-abortion, pro-choice mindset for a minute. So just pretend for a minute I'm pro-choice. The argument is that sometimes we can't pick up a genetic defect inside the womb. I mean, amniocentesis is helpful, and CVS is helpful, and all sorts of other things. Sonograms are helpful, but sometimes we don't know. So the best thing to do is recognize that when a child is born, we don't really right away declare it legally born. This was something that was argued a long time ago by Dr. Francis Crick and others. And so we would do an after-birth abortion, because if we had known whatever it was, it had cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome, Tay-Sachs, sickle cell anemia, whatever it might be, we would have aborted it in the womb. What is the moral problem of waiting till after it's born to then, quote, have an abortion? Do you see the logic of the argument? It's a perverse argument, but you can see that every argument for abortion can very easily become an argument for infanticide, killing a baby. And so it's not surprising that you have in that British Medical Journal, a chance to begin that conversation. So there you go. Exactly.
And why stop at 2? Why not 10 or 15 when they're teenagers?
Don't tempt us. No. Just kidding.
Years ago, I wrote a column, appeared in the Dallas Morning News, the Houston Post, and all sorts of things, and I was using these arguments for abortion because I mentioned Francis Crick said that you would use a biological criterion, that is, why stop at birth. Then I talked about a cultural criterion, and that was Ashley Montague, and he was saying that really a child should not really be considered to be a person, a human being, until it's really been enculturated. And I said, well, golly, that could be an argument for the elimination of anybody who's not read the great books of the Western world. I mean, you just realize that you talk about slippery slope. And again, the argument, and this comes back to a legal argument that I'd like to ask our lawyer about, the argument they're making right now is the 14th Amendment only protects persons. And if you deny the personhood of the unborn, or you deny the personhood of a young infant, or deny the personhood of a person that's in a coma, then you can see, and they can say, well, it's a human being. It's got 46 chromosomes. It's Homo sapiens, but it's not a person. You can see how that legal argument that goes all the way back to 1973, Roe versus Wade, could still come back to haunt us today in the 21st century.
It most certainly could, and that is why many on the American left have opposed for things like laws in states that would identify if a woman is pregnant and the child is injured, the child she's carrying is injured intentionally or unintentionally by somebody else, whether in a car accident or, someone shoots the woman with a gun and the baby's killed. Just the hysteria over a personhood, identifying that unborn child as a person, is fought by the left in state legislatures for exactly the reason that Kerby was saying just a moment ago. And, the other kind of overarching point about all this is the concept that you're going to agree that man gets to decide the value of life and the worth of life is underscoring all of this. Because if you have a notion of life that comes from God, and God is a source of all life, you, man, and not any one of us, men or women, are not actually morally justified or capable of judging its value. But once you abandon that idea, then, you gave examples of some extreme deformity and a parent saying, well, if I'd known, I would have aborted anyway, and then baby's only a few hours old right now. But, once you're deciding the value of life, it gets into the arguments with respect to senior citizens and whether they have value or value enough. And even with babies and newborns, what if you had, gosh, we have 5 boys, we really wanted to have a girl, and doggone it, we had another boy. Well, to our family, this child is very little value because we really didn't want another boy. So once you agree that people can judge the value of life, you have lost your roots.
Yeah, I mean, this just goes back to the division in the nation, because you've got this natural way that God made us. As a mom, God made you to want to help your child no matter what is wrong. I mean, Kassie, your sister just had a baby. My daughter just had one. And, if the baby's sick, you want to help it get well. You start talking to that child very early now in the womb, because we can see into the womb. I mean, my daughter named her little boy, and we called him that name from the time she was 3 or 4 months along, because that humanity is there. And yet there's just this other view. We're so divided on the value and the sanctity of human life still in this country.
Again, Penna's commentary, Divided on Life, it's on our Viewpoints page. And for those of you that receive the Viewpoints, you get an extra one, a value added as Saturday as well. So those are resources that are available to you. Those of you on the line, hold on. Some of you have some great comments, but we can't get to them until after our mandatory break. So we'll come back with more right after this.
What can you get for $5? In most cases, you can't even get a value meal at a fast food restaurant. But I'll tell you one thing $5 can do. If every listener to Point of View sent just $5 this week, believe it or not, and someone here did the math, Point of View could pay the bills for the next 3 years. That's what the number said. $5, 3 years. That's how many of you there are and how little it takes to keep us going. The problem is, most of our listeners have never contributed. Never. To make up for those who don't, others give large gifts, hundreds, even thousands, or monthly donations of $30, $65, $100. I don't know what you can do, but I encourage you to do what you can today, even if that's $5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net. Or send your gift to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Thank you for doing your part for Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, Weekend Edition. Penna Dexter, David Georgatos, as well as Kassie Dulin, and we have talked a little bit about Planned Parenthood. We're going to get into this issue in just a few minutes with Donald Trump and the reaction from candidates like Rick Perry, referring to Trump as a cancer, part of the Know-Nothing Party, Joseph McCarthy. Tell me what you really think, and we'll get into some of those issues, and so that will be one. We might have a few more things because of that to say about the issue of immigration, and a little bit later we'll get into some other topics as well. But let's take a few leftover phone calls. We'll head out to California first. Daniel, thank you for calling today.
Hello. Just taking back off the previous caller before the break. They stated that we can't determine what when a human is born. I forgot how it went, but anyhow, my thoughts are also is that this also applied back with Nazi Germany. Where you take a look at a life and it's not important there. And then I don't know if it was Janet Politano who stated that Christians are on top of the terrorist list. That's another thing to look at. As Christians, they could just deem us not worthy also. But anyhow, back to the initial thing that I called for.
Sure.
Planned Parenthood has stated that I'm going to call it the baby. The baby's not a baby; it's only cells and tissues. And we've been proclaiming the truth for a long time that. We've been claiming the truth for a long time, and they haven't been listening to that. So we get somebody that's going to actually videotape it, and now they come out with bringing charges against them. I think that's just, it's wrong. Not to mention, what you'd state, or it's against the federal law that they shouldn't be selling body parts.
Sure.
When we look at the first covenant, or what we call the Old Testament, the god of Molech, was doing the same thing. They were offering sacrifices of the babies on the god of Molech. And we have an obligation to stand up for what's right and share that light. And I'm grateful for all of you that are doing this today. It's a blessing that you're doing that. Wanted to say that. I want to also ask this, too. I don't know if this applies or not, but whistleblower. I forgot how that all ties in. I'm sure some of you do, but I would think that this kind of, ties in with this particular case of the people videotaping and exposing the truth rather than allowing the lie to be proclaimed.
Like a whistleblower exemption?
Right. And, of course, we have whistleblower policies that most companies have. I don't know if Planned Parenthood has one, but most 501c3 nonprofit groups do have those. And so, of course, this Center for Medical Progress may not be an employee. It's usually used to protect an employee. But, Debbie, since you raised it, let me come to you first. It just seems to me that here's a good example of shoot the messenger. Rather than having Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General of the United States of America, investigate Planned Parenthood. Instead, it sounds like she wants to have the Justice Department investigate the Center for Medical Progress, the ones that did the videos.
It's exactly what she's talking about. And, this is a problem in America, not just with respect to this issue, but has in the last 6 years and maybe a little longer, there has been a turning in the Department of Justice away from enforcing justice, and which is the incumbent, or just it's their primary job. It's the reason they exist. It is what rule of law requires them to enforce the law. But turning away from doing that to using the power of the Department of Justice and the power of enforcement and prosecution against political enemies. The truth is that people who are supporting life are viewed as political enemies by many in the American left. So this is a shut down these political enemies of ours the same way the IRS went after Tea Parties and wasn't going to allow them to get their 501c4 certifications. This is just a political use of the government's power, and it's very dangerous for us to allow it.
Well, again, that's why, as we said before, elections matter. Let me take another call here because this might relate to something I think Kassie said just a minute ago. We'll go out to Texas this time. KBJS. Melissa, you have the floor. What would you like to add?
Well, I just find it interesting that Planned Parenthood has told us for years that these are blobs of tissue or cells, but yet they're harvesting body parts. If they have body parts, how can they be blobs of tissue? If they're blobs of tissue, how can they have body parts?
Good point.
Wouldn't they have to, confirm what we as Christians believe, that that's a baby?
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's sort of shows our message. And, one of the comments by the second doctor, Dr. Gatter, I think her name is, when she talked about a less crunchy method for extracting babies. I mean, I'm sorry. That's pretty disgusting.
Well, and one thing that I thought of as people are looking at this issue of really trying to justify abortion as well, is it really a life? What would happen if this investigation had been conducted at a veterinarian and he was taking fully healthy, fully formed puppies and crushing them and extracting their body parts? Would we have an issue with that? I think we might.
We'd have the left would be out of their mind. PETA would be on the warpath about that.
I think dog owners all over the country would.
Just amazing. Melissa, good point. Thank you for calling in today.
Thank you.
Let me, just before we take a break, get maybe some of your comments. That is, a lot of people in the Republican Party are saying, how do we respond to what is being said by Donald Trump? He is leading right now. Not that these polls mean anything at all, but you have 16 men and 1 woman that have announced so far for the Republican side. And so it's difficult to break out when, first of all, you're one of 17. And second of all, it's even more difficult to break out when the only person getting the attention right now is Donald Trump. So at least Rick Perry, former governor of the state of Texas, has been to say that he's a cancer on conservatism, that he's a toxic mix of demagoguery, mean-spiritedness, and nonsense that will lead the Republican Party to perdition. He refers to that like the know-nothing movement. Well, I can go on, but Debbie, you're shaking your head, so you get first chance.
I think that the GOP candidates piling on Donald Trump are, number one, dancing to the media's music. The media loves to have Republicans criticize each other, and I think it shows savvy and political strength for a candidate to say, if the question was, what about what Donald Trump said about immigrants, just to answer with, here's my view on immigration, here's my view on sanctuary cities. Do not play the media's game, because you're showing weakness. And I think people look at candidates and they say, oh, so now I see how you will respond every time the media comes after you. Because if you're president and they criticize a decision you make about foreign policy or anything else, is your first reaction going to be to backstep and two-step and apologize? Or is it going to to just say what you think? And so I think it's a huge mistake for the GOP candidates to pile on Trump. I will say there are some candidates in Texas or some elected officials who felt like they worked very hard to get elected and worked very hard to establish a good rapport and connection with Spanish-speaking voters, with people who've come to Texas newly arrivals, but they are legal and they do vote, had tried very hard to establish a good relationship, and they're concerned about this kind of eviscerating what Donald Trump's statements will eviscerate all that goodwill they created, and is piling on is the American left effort always to portray Republicans or conservatives as being anti-Hispanic. So I understand why they're concerned, but I think that the candidates who can just do as Ted Cruz and Rick Santorum, the other one's John Kasich, all did essentially to say, we are not going to comment on Trump. Here's what I think about X.
Well, we'll take a break and get some more comments around the round table, but we'd also love to hear your comments as well. Why do you think that Donald Trump, for example, right now has been able to get such attention? On what do you think is an appropriate strategy? If maybe you support a different candidate, what would you suggest that he or she should do in the light of some of that as well? 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
A new book on the state of the American mind reminds us of the ignorance and anti-intellectualism on college campuses and in our popular culture. One of the editors of this work is Emory professor Mark Bauerlein, who I've talked about before because he was the author of the book The Dumbest Generation, How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future. He was on my radio program recently to summarize what 16 different authors talked about in the book. Mark Bauerlein and Edie Hirsch in their chapters remind us that even in a time of unprecedented wealth and rising college enrollment, most students are functionally illiterate as well as culturally illiterate. Daniel Dreisbach wrote about the lack of biblical literacy in our society. He tells the story of the media reaction to President George W. Bush's address at the first presidential inauguration. Pledging a national commitment to serve the poor, Bush mentioned the biblical parable of the Good Samaritan. Media pundits wondered about this strange story. One CBS commentator confessed, "There were a few phrases in that speech I just didn't get." One of those, he said, was this allusion to a wounded traveler on the road to Jericho. You know, we might expect this level of biblical illiteracy when conducting a man-on-the-street interview, but we should expect better from well-educated political commentators. Dennis Prager recounts his experience when asking high school students if they would save their dog or a stranger if both were drowning. He sadly explains that aside from some religious schools, Jewish and Christian, he receives the same answer. 1/3 would save the dog, 1/3 would save the stranger, and 1/3 find the question too difficult to answer. When he asks why they would save the dog, the near universal answer is, well, I love my dog. I don't love the stranger. There is no moral examination, no contrast between humans and animals. These and many other stories and statistics remind us that we not only have cultural illiteracy, but we also have biblical illiteracy and moral illiteracy as well. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Get to those phone calls in just a minute, but Penna, you're up because we were talking a little bit about Donald Trump and Rick Perry's response and Ted Cruz and some of the others. What are your thoughts about why Donald Trump is gaining such attention? And more importantly, what about these other 16 candidates who might say, yeah, but what about me? I've got some things to say as well.
Well, the media is definitely allowing it. And, you know, I read Rick Perry, some of the things that he's done in response. And then my first sort of reaction was, wow, he's really taking this and turning it into sort of his conservative manifesto. But then you see the headlines of it. For instance, he compares Trump to cancer, know-nothings, and Joe McCarthy in double-barreled D.C. speech. This was a National Review. So it's almost like the media loves this because it is all of us fighting and sort of with some low blows and things. So, of course, Ted Cruz's his reaction to this is brilliant. I mean, because he really kind of stands for some of the critiques that that Trump has of political correctness and the way our government works. He stands with him. But he doesn't just sit there and applaud him, because the way that would be suicide. I mean, with a lot of the electorate. But what he does is he just sort of takes parts of them and uses that in his own battles. So there's one piece that I read where there was a Senate hearing on Tuesday, and this came from Red State. The way they described it is good, because he said at a Senate hearing on Tuesday, Senator Ted Cruz 100%. Oh no, not 100%. He's 100% conservative, but he vaporized the head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Sarah Saldana, on the subject of the Obama administration routinely releasing illegal immigrants. And so, he had the statistics out
Yes,
there
he does.
to
Boy,
just really wipe her out in an argument. He's so good at doing that. So that's what he's doing. He's taking the pieces of Trump that are so popular and catching on, and then he's taking his substance and he's putting it into his message, but he's not talking about Trump when he does it. And I think that's a brilliant strategy.
I think so too. Kassie, any comments?
Sure. I think it's easy to challenge a position that you don't agree with without getting into personal attacks. And I think that's where Perry really had a misstep. And, I recently attended a training where they talked about when you do public relations, what are people looking for? What is likability? We've all heard, obviously, likability is such an important factor. And that may be a reason that Obama won over Romney and over McCain, and why Bush won when he ran against John Kerry. But the interesting thing is, I always thought likability is if someone likes you, but what they're looking at is saying, do you like me, in response? And I think the way that Perry's tone has been with this, it makes people think, oh, I don't think he would like me. I don't think I like him as much. But I think when I read the two stories of Cruz's response and Perry's, I came away liking Cruz more because I thought he would like me more because he has some grace, and he may not agree with the position, but he's going to handle it in a respectful way.
Yeah. Penna and I grew up in California, and I'll say that I'm the older of the two, but when we were growing up, the governor was a man by the name of Ronald Reagan. Maybe you've heard him. And he did two things. Number one, he had what was called the 11th commandment, thou shalt not speak evil or ill of a fellow Republican. And there's some things to be seen there. Number two, he tended to always be positive. We had Arthur Brooks on this week, and he demonstrated time and time again with all sorts of studies that people respond to, as you said, likability, or to the happy warrior. They don't expect you to be Pollyanna and always be positive. There are times when, if you look at Ronald Reagan's speeches, he was very critical of the expanded state and all of that. But he did a kind of a word map in his book, his latest book, which is really well written, by the way, on the speech that was given by Ronald Reagan at his acceptance speech at the Republican Convention back in 1980. And the biggest word that shows up there is government, but the second largest word is people. Now, you expect government because he's going to be talking about government, but he spent lots of time talking about people, telling stories, being the kind of person that you would just love to sit across the table and have coffee with. And I think we've got to recognize that there is a need right now for a candidate to have the facts and the ability to communicate, and maybe not try to criticize their fellow Republicans, but spend some time really trying to be positive and put forth a vision that people really can understand and really get around. So that's at least one thought that I have, and love to round the table again to see any comments about what I've just put on the table here for you.
I love what you put in the table. I think people do want to hear, they want a sense from a candidate that this person loves and respects the American people, that he has respect for the idea of America and what it is. There's a way you can say a lot of great ideas about the greatness of America, and by omission, you're not praising the bad guy, the wrong ideas, but is the way Ronald Reagan spoke. He made everyone feel like, wow, he loves Americans. He loves us. He loves this country. He loves the goodness of it. And he drew people to him mostly a very positive, loving manner of speaking. And even when he was getting after the more liberal viewpoints, I remember the one line that he was so famous for saying something about, problem with liberals, they believe so many things that just aren't so. I mean, it's a very strong statement, but just in a friendly way. And I just think there's so much concern, angst, fear, anger on the right about the direction of our country, that the way we communicate about America can sound very angry and upset and just ready to burst. But if someone's not tuned in and doesn't know what's happening, we just sound angry. We have to be able to speak positively, even though we are very upset. Speak positively about America, the goodness of its people, the goodness of its founding, the goodness of its ideas, and people will be drawn to that. We have to try to hold in that anger, because I know that the anger gives rise to just, worked up speech that people can't relate to.
I think, if you ask the question, what should the other candidates do about this right now? Trump is a problem for everybody. He's, as we said, sucking the oxygen out of the room. He's criticizing people. He's inflammatory. The other problem with him is, everyone says, well, he can't get the nomination, but could he take everybody away, a few people away, and actually ruin it for Republicans by forming a third party and running as an independent or something like that? So that's would be just try to get your message out and try to ignore him as much as possible and make him irrelevant and hope that he kind of flames out. But it's possible that he will just continue to be strong. I think another thing that's going to happen is we're going to have debates pretty soon, and he'll be up there, and that's going to be hard to ignore him. But I think still, again, as much as possible, they're going to have to try. And if he gets over the top, that might be to the other candidates' advantage on television, because when everybody's seeing him in comparison to their demeanor, it might show him in a bad light. Now, if you've got a good demeanor and a brilliant mind with a bully pulpit, as some of the people that can speak very well. I mean, I'm thinking Ted Cruz, who I just mentioned. I'm thinking Carly Fiorina, who, she's just a good arguer. I think there's certain people that are up there that perhaps don't have really a chance, but they're good. Mike Huckabee's another one. He's great in debating. So, perhaps all of this, it'll just play itself out. It's very hard right now, though. With him.
Again, let's look back 8 years ago, and this would be then in 2007. Who was leading in the polls at that time? Rudy Giuliani. Who was second? Fred Thompson. Who was third? Mitt Romney. Who was hardly even a percentage point? The man who won the nomination, Mr. McCain, Senator McCain, John McCain. So again, or even look back 4 years ago at this time, you had kind of the flavor of the month kind of candidate, right? Yeah. Do you remember those?
Yeah, you had a McCain, you had a Bachman, and you had a Huckabee and a Santorum, and each one had their day.
Rick Perry had a week.
Perry. Oh, yeah, Rick Perry. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so the point I'm making is these polls don't mean a whole lot right now, but at the same time, we're going to have this debate. And I guess the first issue is, who should be on the stage? And Fox says they're going to put 10 up there, and then they're going to try to have a second one with the other 7 now it's going to be, I guess. Who should be on the 10 and who should not be? That's one of the questions I want to put on the table. We're going to a break, and maybe you'd like to suggest who you think those candidates should be that are on the platform. I'm going to go around our round table and get their comments about maybe 2 or 3, or maybe they want to pick all 10. I don't know. I'll see what they want to do. And so that's one more thing. But then also, as we get into this, one of the things that has energized everybody is Donald Trump's comments about immigration. Was he wrong? And in light of the fact that this has been a debate for some time, but is really heated up, not just because of what Donald Trump said, but because of what, interesting enough, Ann Coulter has written in the book Adios America. So we want to get into that issue. And at the end, I do want to talk about education. Would it be ever appropriate for someone to be in the Texas State Board of Education who herself is not only not a teacher, but who had kids that were homeschooled? And that's an interesting debate taking place in Texas, but I think it also illustrates, again, the way we sort of define education as the State Board of Public Education versus the State Board of Education. And Kassie has some comments about that as well. So a lot more to talk about, but if you'd like to join that conversation today, let's open up the phones again. Last half hour, open line, 1-800-351-1212. And don't forget to go to our website, pointofview.net. You can see Penna Dexter's commentaries, our action items, and lots of videos for you to watch. It's all there at pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Imagine you're in a room with 99 other people, 100 of you total. All of you listen to Point of View. You have that in common. What you don't have in common is that only one of you, actually less than 1 in 100, has ever supported the work of Point of View. That's what a recent study showed. 1 in 100, fewer than 1% have given, 99% have not. You listen, so I know you appreciate what this program provides. Now, I invite you to move from the big group to the little one. If 1/3, 33% of those listening gives just $5 this week, we could fully fund Point of View for a year, 12 months. Not everyone will, not everyone can, but can you give $5 today, or maybe $55 or $105? Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send your gift to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Join the few, the thankful. Support Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention on our website today, we do have the article about Planned Parenthood and some of the reaction to it. The one that we just quoted from a minute ago about Donald Trump and some of the reaction from Rick Perry. Have one on appeasing Iran. I put that up there because, interestingly enough, we are seeing a number of people very upset about the Iran deal. We'll come back to that perhaps later next week as we get into that. But I thought it was kind of intriguing to see that it isn't just Republicans, for example, that are speaking to this issue, but Democrats as well. And so I thought it would be something that you might want to read about and get some perspective on. And then, of course, we have a piece as well about this issue of immigration. So lots of topics to address, but I wanted you to at least have a chance to read a few of those and to see a little bit more about that. And this piece on appeasing Iran, by the way, Victor Davis Hanson does a great job of speaking to that issue. And I've really been struck by all the people that have expressed concerns about the deal. So we'll do that maybe next week. But on the table for just a minute, what a difficult choice Fox News has to make. They can only take, or they've only decided to take 10 out of the 17. So we got to leave some off. But any people that you think, other than obviously Donald Trump's going to be on there, but Debbie Georgatos, who else do you think should be up there on that platform and deserves a hearing? You've talked to some of them, so I'd love to see what you have to say.
I have talked to some of them, and I'm really excited about this debate. I wish, my quick plug is, I wish Fox would have 5, 5, and 5, because 10 is a lot of people to try to follow during a debate. It's just a lot of people to keep track of. I think people will be confused. But Donald Trump, I don't think you can deny him a spot, even though I understand there's rumblings within the RNC to try to keep him off the stage. I think Governor Walker has been consistently up in the polls, and people are interested in him, or interested in having a governor. I think Senator Ted Cruz has led an amazing campaign. I think Mike Huckabee probably will be up there. He ran last time, and he's got a kind of a stable base of people supporting him. I think Jeb Bush, I don't mean to leave him off. People list him at the offset or after Trump. I think that the Jeb Bush, to our conversation earlier, I cannot see him being someone who would lead America back away from the bad things that Barack Obama has done. And so I'm concerned, but yes, I think he probably has earned a place as the establishment character in the entire race. I have that list. I mean, I could give you a list of people I don't want to see. Is that are you interested in that list?
Anybody who's ever listened to this program knows that you said George Pataki more than once that you would like to keep off the stage, which I guess, given the fact that you have some roots in New York, maybe is understandable. But a lot of people go, "Ooh, I don't even know who he is." Go for it.
The other one thing I would say, I think Marco Rubio is, every time I hear him, he is so likable. You hear him speak and you think, I'd invite that guy to Thanksgiving dinner. Although I did hear recently he announced that he's going to go along with raising minimum wage. He got off on a very liberal talking point about, yes, you got to help the poor, we're going to raise minimum wage. And that's just like, that's a huge signal of pandering to the media, pandering to the ignorant voter who thinks that will actually help anyone.
Yeah, he does a little too much of that. I like him too, but he does a lot of that pandering.
You would also add Carly Fiorina, wouldn't you?
Oh my gosh!
You spent so much time with her. You've interviewed. As a matter of fact, you're interviewing her this Sunday.
Again this Sunday, she's been
on your show. Okay.
Show a couple of times. I love Carly Fiorina. I hope she's not listening, because I didn't mean to leave her off the list. I love Carly Fiorina. I will say, for a couple of things, she has been the most articulate in pointing out Hillary Clinton's shortcomings. Men are not able to do that. It's just a bad visual. It's harder for men to do that, and she's been really good about it. She left Katie Couric just spinning in circles. She is able to take a pretty aggressive, left-leaning interviewer, and just with grace and clarity and consistency and never raising her voice, she's in charge. She's running that room. She was I think she'd be extraordinary, and I would love to see her stay in the race, be on that stage of 10, and stay in the race a long time.
I think it's wrong to pick and choose at this point. I think everybody should, unless you're lower than 1% in the polls, should be able to debate. And they should just figure out a way to do that. It's not fair for the RNC to pick candidates, and it's not fair for the Fox News or CNN or anyone else to pick the candidates. And so, you mentioned earlier who was where. in the last election.
That's exactly where I was going to take this,
yeah,
because look at John McCain. He was not in the running in 2007, and look who won in 2008. Yeah.
So everybody ought to be, the people that rose from nothing and rose, in the last round, in the 2012 elections, that was kind of an unfortunate thing for social conservatives. But we're so early right now, we ought to be able to see everyone. And then, especially this August debate that's taking place. Come on, that's more than a year ahead of the election. It's several months ahead of the primaries in all the states. And they ought to be able to figure out a way, whether it be back-to-back, perhaps some sort of a lottery where you don't even know until the last minute who are going to be your debating partners. Maybe 5-5-5, maybe just splitting them in two. But this is not fair for these networks to be picking and choosing. They will hurt campaigns. They will cause people to drop out just simply because of who they choose. And that is not right in America.
That's not right, yeah.
Penna, I think that's a great point. And to just embellish on it, we were talking on the break about the idea that Donald Trump has come to the top of the polling largely because of media attention to things that he says. But, if the tree fell in the forest, no one heard it really fall. If he said things that were crazy, abrasive, and no one reported it, he wouldn't be where he is in the polls. The media is giving him this attention, and then he's rising in the polls because of it. And so this is especially egregious then, because he'll be viewed, I think, as number one in the polls as we get into that first debate in August. And he is he's getting it because the media pays attention to him. It's like they're building up who is by the attention they give to the campaigns.
Kassie, I wanted to come to you for no other reason than you don't have to pick who you want to put on there, but you've worked on a campaign. So let's talk about that for just a minute, because you bring a little bit of a perspective.
Appreciate what you were saying about before the caucuses. I joined in November, and by January, he had gone from being in Iowa, just polling in the single digits, to winning the entire caucus. And what was interesting about him, and this is something that I'd like to see in all the candidates, and I think it ties back to what we were talking about earlier about likability. People care, do you like me? But they also want to know, do you care about me? And that is one of the issues that President Obama did so well at, especially in 2008. People thought, wow, he really cares about me. And so if he cares about me, I can trust him. And so with Governor Huckabee, I remember I would be in the front office and we'd have people come in who would sign up and say, you can only vote in the Democratic or the Republican caucus. And they said, I usually am in the Democratic, but I'm going to do it in the Republican because I just like him. They said, I never thought I would do this, but I like him and I want to support him. And I think that's something that the entire Republican field can and should do a better job of showing, hey, we like people. That's not a bad thing. That's not that's something that we can do as Republicans, but also we care about people. And I think that message is going to win people over, as well as being strong on the values.
Any comments, too, about Governor Huckabee and how he did so well?
He did.
Yeah, it was just amazing because he had a lot against him. He was a pastor. Some people say, do I really want a pastor in the White House? And he had a campaign that was kind of on a shoestring. Wouldn't you agree?
Definitely.
Yeah. And yet he came out of nowhere from some people's perspective. Now, you made it happen, but nevertheless, Penna, your comments. Yeah.
Yeah, and, he kind of got... he did well because he sort of drew the social conservative group, and now we have many candidates that can do that, that are capable of doing that. Yeah. So it's going to split them up. So yes, there is going to have to be a winnowing of the field, but I don't think it's up to the media to do it.
I would certainly agree. Well, we just put a few on the table there, and perhaps you have your favorites, but I would encourage you to, first of all, make a point of watching that August debate. I agree with Penna. It just makes no sense to be picking and choosing winners. We leave the Import and Export Bank to do that, don't we? Just kidding.
Good point.
But at the same time, because of Donald Trump and because of some of the comments by Rick Perry and because of even the comments today by Ted Cruz and because of some of the other candidates, I think you could sell tickets to this debate in ways that nobody would have paid attention to an August debate. I got a feeling a lot more people are going to tune in to this debate than ever before.
One person we didn't mention, all we have on other shows, is Bobby Jindal.
Sure.
We've
interviewed him here. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a strong Christian, and he's really, I think early on in his political career, he had one speech that he said seemed kind of too soft or not as articulate, but he's just developed his speaking style, and he's very genuine. And I think, my visual is for the actual race is I think we're going to have Hillary in the Democrat side. And we need someone who can really say the conservative message in a warm, loving, friendly, and energetic way. I just think, she's kind of, to me, she strikes me as kind of cold and someone who can be warm and engaging the visual be fabulous on the stage. And Bobby Jindal I don't know of any strikes against him. I like him too. I don't know how his campaign's doing. I haven't seen his numbers, but I don't think they're great right now.
No, it's about 1% in Real Clear Politics average.
Yeah, about 1%. Again, some of these candidates have I like him, but a few of them really don't have that exception. So that's kind of intriguing too. Let's take a break, take some phone calls, and continue our conversation right after this.
Polls show that American society is becoming more and more pro-life. And that's excellent news, due in no small measure to the heroic work of the pro-life movement over the years. Technology that allows us an increasingly clear and awe-inspiring window into the womb means no one can deny this is a human life. This probably explains why expectant parents increasingly refer to their unborn children by name well before the actual birth. Washington Post columnist and former George W. Bush speechwriter Michael Gerson notes how early young parents' protective instinct kicks in these days. Birth, he writes, is somewhat of an arbitrary dividing line. In a recent column, he explained that particularly as technology has allowed us to peer into the womb, human instincts for protection have engaged earlier than 9 months. But then there are those who have completely lost that instinct, like the Planned Parenthood doctor who over lunch nonchalantly discussed her organization's practice of trafficking in baby body parts. She was captured on video describing, between bites of salad and sips of red wine, ways in which she encourages abortionists to perform their craft so as to leave intact certain body parts for medical research. She assumed her lunch partners from the Center for Medical Progress were right there with her on the utilitarian good this trade in human tissue provides. They were not. In his column on this, Michael Gerson pointed out that our society is becoming more liberal and inclusive, a trend which has been created and fostered by the left. Yet despite the science that clearly highlights the humanity of the unborn child, the left continues to support abortion, even late-term abortion. On this issue, convenience and other concerns trump liberals' trademark compassion. Any value to the fetus until it emerges from the birth canal. And morally implausible. Despite the science, we're still a nation divided on the issue of abortion and the sanctity of human life. Ian Tuttle at National Review describes the schizophrenic state of the country, pointing out that there are those who believe the unborn are persons endowed with the right to life, and those who believe the unborn are property, disposable, and by extension, exchangeable within the confines of existing law. The fetus has moral worth that the state is duty-bound to protect unless the mother decides it doesn't, in which case the fetus can legally be aborted. And by the way, why not harvest some fetal tissue for research while we're at it? The division on abortion extends into the halls of Congress. Lawmakers battle over ending the flow of federal funds to Planned Parenthood. That should be a no-brainer now. And amazingly, a bill that would nullify all restrictions on abortion keeps rearing its ugly head. Pro-life Americans still have work to do. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's take a phone call. We'll go to WB and in Georgia. Jeannie, thank you for calling today.
Yes, my comment was to recall what happened when McCain was nominated in 12. Do you recall the media frenzy over how wonderful he would be? And that's really who had a huge influence on him being nominated. It was not really grassroots people.
He was a media darling for many years.
And then after he was nominated, guess what happened to him?
Oh, boy. Yeah, then they turned against him, right?
Right. So I just wanted to point that out, that the grassroots people really did not nominate him. They were influenced by the national media.
Right.
And
Absolutely
that is something
true.
to be very aware of in this election, because they will choose the most liberal person to support when they go through the convention process.
Sure. And I have a word right now to our friends and our listeners in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada. We'll just pick those few for a moment. And that is, you have just a disproportionate influence on who the candidate is. And some of these caucuses and some of these straw polls have a disproportionate influence. And I hope that you will be very careful, because some of us sitting around the table, by the time we get to vote, it may already be pretty much a done deal. And so that's, I think, the other unfortunate nature of all of that. And so if that is actually being influenced by the media and by who gets the press and who gets the attention, and you're not really looking at where the individual stands, we're going to have the same kind of experience we've had the last couple of election cycles.
Jeannie, I think you have a great point. I think it's really important for every voter to look at not who the media is pushing, but who really stands for what they believe in, who they trust. Because in this cycle, before Donald Trump came in out of nowhere, the media was really pushing Jeb Bush as a presumptive nominee. And I don't know a lot of conservatives who are supportive of him. But this is, if Donald Trump fizzles out, which, the other thing about Donald Trump that I meant to say much earlier, I want to say, is he's very liberal on many extremely important issues. And people who are all excited because he's saying tough guy things about immigration need to look at everything he stands for, because he's not really very conservative at all. But anyway, Jeannie, it's a great point about just don't let the media pick the candidate. You pick it by actually paying attention.
And I think it's so important to look at their history too, not just what they're saying now, because there are some positions that have become very popular, and we see candidates all moving in that direction, saying the same thing, which I'm grateful that so many of them have come out in support of traditional marriage. I think that's a really good thing, but it's important to look at their history and make sure, have they backed that position up, or are they just saying it because it's popular?
Good point.
Very good point. Just before we ran out of time, I wanted to use a story out of Texas, and I know our listeners are in all sorts of different states, but I think it's instructive of what's happening more and more in terms of the educational establishment. And Kassie, you know about this because indeed we're talking about who would be the head of the Texas State Board of Education. And this is a big controversy because this is an individual, first of all, that's not an educator, doesn't have a PhD in education, is not part of the educational establishment. That's bad enough. But horrors, she homeschooled her kids. I mean, okay, get out the pitchforks and the torches now, because after all, you want to have someone head up the Texas State Department of Education, the board, if you will, the school board for Texas, and she's a homeschool mom. What about this?
Horror of all horrors. No, I think there was a lot of, that did become a news story. The Wall Street Journal did a story on it of being so concerned. But, I think it's important to realize this isn't the Board of Public Schools. It's the Board of Education. And the question is, does this woman know about education? And for that, I would say, well, let's look at her track record. She has 3 sons. 2 of them went to Rice. 1 went to UT. All graduated with their degrees in engineering, which I think we would all agree those are pretty academically rigorous schools and pretty difficult degrees. So she had a history of success there, and she's been serving and doing a great job. But I think it's just really important to remember, too, that this is about the value of education, and we want to have the best educational future for our children. And one of the best things for that, as has been proven by study after study, is choice and the ability for parents to choose what is the best form of education for their children. And I think that as a homeschooler, someone who's done that, she brings a lot of value to that position. And again, it's not the Board of Public Schools, but the Board of Education.
Okay, I got to put you on the spot. You've been homeschooled.
I have, yes, sir. So I might be a little bit biased in that, full disclosure.
Well, and also Penna has homeschooled her kids. And
yeah, and it's a good example. You look at Kassie and, how well she conducts herself, the success she's had, the influence she's already had on the state and the country through the things that she's done. And she was homeschooled, and I see that a lot. I see a lot of young people from homeschool families that are doing great things. And, one of the things is we have a school system in Texas that's run by educrats. And, they're all pro-public school, of course, and they run the public schools. And so the Board of Education, in a sense, they think they should also run the Board of Education sometimes. I think that's probably true in just about every state. And so the Board of Education has to sometimes push back on things with them. They are their bosses, technically. So I think it's a great balance. You've got 14 members of the Texas State Board of Education. Most of them have worked in the public schools, been teachers, or they've been parents. They've had kids in the schools. So to have their chairman be a homeschooler, it provides a great balance. This is a person who didn't homeschool because they didn't care. She homeschooled because she saw deficiencies in the school system, and she wanted to avoid those with her own children. What better person to be able to try to solve some of the problems in education in Texas?
You know, one of the people we've always enjoyed interviewing over the years is Phyllis Schlafly.
Yeah.
And she taught all of her children how to read because she was concerned that they would not learn phonics and they would not learn how to decode the language. And those kids all turned out pretty well as well.
Well, they did. They did. She was a real role model for me because she just taught them to read it. Then they went to school, and then I looked at that and thought, well, I can at least homeschool in the early years, which is what I did.
You certainly did.
I just noticed in the one article that I think maybe posted that the criticism of this woman being selected to chair the board was there's a critic named Thomas Ratliff he's a Texas board member, he's even a Republican, and his first comment about her was, I think it ought to be a baseline requirement that the chair of the State Board of Education have at least some experience in that realm in the public schools, he's saying, as a parent, teacher, or something. But he later referred to his earlier criticism as a temper tantrum and that the board's new chair is doing a great job. Just one of the many examples about, I think homeschooling in some media and left-wing circles is mocked or derided. It's really important to get your facts straight, know what the truth is about it, and not just what the media says about it.
Yes, well, Kassie, if you're the role model, that's a good one.
Yeah.
She went to Patriot Academy, became the governor there and all the rest, and was on the Huckabee campaign. Let me go around the roundtable real quickly. If people want to know a little bit more about Liberty Institute, where they can find some information, how do they do so?
Well, they can go to libertyinstitute.org. They can learn about our cases like the Mount Soledad case we talked about earlier and all the other cases we have going on right now to defend religious liberty in America.
Okay, Debbie, you got a talk show coming up on Sunday, and even if they are not in a place where they can hear it on their radio station, they can listen to it online. You got Carly Fiorina. What else is going on?
Yes, the radio station is 660 AM for North Texas, and online anywhere in the country, 660 AM theanswer.com is Sunday night 6 to 8. We have Carly Fiorina coming on, and we also have a guy coming on from Heritage Action to talk about the next plan this coming fall in September to repeal Obamacare, a plan that works in Washington. And it's kind of a novel idea, so I want to urge you to tune in.
Well, very good. Just about out of time. Let me just mention that I did talk about Ryan Anderson will be with us on Monday, and that will be 1 hour. But the other hour we're devoting to two individuals, one with Family Research Council, one with National Right to Life, on these Planned Parenthood videos. And I do believe even between now and then there might be another one drop, and so we might be talking about that. So there's a lot to talk about next week.
That sounds like a great show.
We are looking forward to it. So, and again, we're looking forward to the roundtable, and I want to thank all three of you women for joining this, and we've got to do it again sometime. Behind the curtain there, I also want to thank Andrew and Matthew, and there's Chris, and who else? Oh, I guess we have Abby, all involved. I always miss somebody because we have so many people behind the glass, but they're all there. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.
There is a big incentive to pay your electric bill. If you don't, you find yourself cold and in the dark. But who pays to make sure you're educated on the key issues of the day, to bring you wisdom for life at work, at home, and in the culture, like you hear from guests here on Point of View? Who makes sure that our electric bill gets paid? You're way ahead of me, aren't you? That's right. You do. The truth is, if every listener this week gave just $5, we could pay our bills for about the next 3 years. Did you hear me? $5, 3 years. Now, perhaps you can give more. How about $50 or $500, maybe even more? But please, don't be the one who fails to send at least $5. .net or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Whatever amount you chip in, thank you for your gift. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.